91.5 FM WUML Lowell. That was the Tompkins Square Park Consciousness Expander off of the 1971 LP No More Walls, David Amram and Friends. And speaking of friends, right now on Almost Acoustic 91.5 FM WUML Lowell through the miracles of modern technology, joining me on the airwaves is the one and only Brian Hassett. Brian, are you there?
Yeah, Mike. Good to be talking to you across the universe.
Absolutely, you too. There's that moment every time I get a phone call queued up that I just wait to hear the voice come through, and then I say, "Oh, good, it's there. It's actually happening.
We have contact.
We are on air, and it is so great. And contact is what it is all about. I am so excited to say you will be returning to the city of Lowell in just a few short weeks for Lowell Celebrates Kerouac. I hung out with you last year. You've been back many times, and actually immortalized the experience in the in the center of one of your Beat trilogy, right?
Yeah, man. It's about writing and connecting. When you have an amazing experience, whether that's falling in love or going to a concert or meeting a hero or whatever it is, write about it right away.
Right.
And, one of my things about this is I don't want to have to tell the same story 1,000 times.
Right.
So that was part of my impetus all along in writing.
Right.
Was like, let me tell this once, really great, and then I can just give this to everybody, and I don't have to tell the story a million times.
Right, or you can just grab those nuggets as they fit into the to the larger scope of whatever moments you live through going forward, right?
Right, and so that's what happened at LCK the first time I experienced it, and then which was just 3-4 years ago.
Yeah.
Which is kind of a whole long story how it led to that. But when it happened, I wanted to create it for all of the millions of people who haven't done it yet.
Right.
And I was a Kerouac fan for, 30 years or some crazy thing before I actually physically got to an LCK. And then I haven't stopped. I've never not gone back ever since I first, discovered it's, the golden egg. Absolutely.
And that I'm referring to, and when I said the Beat trilogy, the second book in the Beat trilogy, penned by the one and only Brian Hassett, is How the Beats Begat the Pranksters. And the second chapter of that one is titled Lowell Celebrates Kerouac, and it is quite literally, I believe, and if you can bring me into the creation of this, but it was a spontaneous ode that you penned after spending basically a whole quiet day after the festival over in Edson Cemetery, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Oh, yeah. That's very good. That is how it all came about. And, so I would have written it, right after the experience.
Right.
And that's really important, too. And then, so that's in there, I'm so glad that's in that book because it's, as you say it's part of, it's I've got it down for history, and it's part of this trilogy. And not only, Jack, the whole reason we all get excited about Lowell Celebrates Kerouac, this guy named Jack,
right?
He had a great trip, a bunch of them in his life, and wrote about them,
right?
And got them in paper, in books, and wrote them in some cases very soon after the actual experience themselves, say his Big Sur, writing Big Sur, or even, I guess On the Road by the time that draft is about 4 years after the events of that book. But a lot of times he wrote it right afterwards or very shortly afterwards. Get it down on paper, and then other people can experience, for instance, Maggie Cassidy falling in love with your high school sweetheart,
right.
Or, Dr. Sachs roaming, a kid with a great imagination running around the streets of a small town at night, and the fantasy worlds that come to life. And, or chasing girls, or being in a car, or going to New York City, or all of those experiences of life. That guy was so masterful at getting down on the page.
Yeah.
And so I'm sort of doing that continuing that same tradition, and it's like I have an amazing experience in Lowell, so let's get that down, and then everybody can experience it from, Mexico to Alaska to Vancouver, and then hopefully make it there.
Absolutely, and that is one of the beautiful things about Lowell Celebrates Kerouac. It does draw you know, all types of appreciators of the work and life of Jack Kerouac from all over the globe, and they come here and come together, and it is a beautiful thing. You captured it so beautifully in that ode, and I'm so glad, as you said, it made it into the How the Beats Begat the Pranksters book. That one being the centerpiece of as I keep referring to the Beat trilogy, but for your own self and sort of that idea of taking your life experiences and translating them to something that can be accessed by the greater sort of world or greater consciousness. That all sort of began way back in 1982 with a personal adventure of your own, right?
Yeah, that one. The first book in the trilogy.
Right.
The Hitchhiker's Guide to Jack Kerouac.
Absolutely.
Get it at your local bookstore. Yeah, that was this incredible, and that also began with a book story, which was I had gone to Vancouver. I had gone to NYU. I finished my first 2 years at New York University, and I'd already hooked up in Manhattan, and I'd already hooked up with Bill Graham, who's one of my two life heroes. By the time I left little town Winnipeg, Manitoba, and went out into the world, I had two big heroes. One was Bill Graham, and the other was Ken Kesey.
Right.
And I went to New York, and within a year, I was working with Bill Graham. And so that second year, my mission was to go to the West Coast and find Kesey.
Right.
But anyway, I was out there, and kind of a long story, but then it was my girlfriend's little sister's 18th birthday. Mm-hmm. And so Uncle Brian, it was the time I could buy her some adult books. So I went out and got her, I can't remember the other one, but I went to get her On the Road. And all of these bookstores did not have it.
Wow.
They didn't even have On the Road in 1982, is how out of fashion Kerouac was at that point.
And it, just to not to make too fine a point of it, but it at a sort of a time where a consciousness or awareness or appreciation of Kerouac was probably at the lowest point from his sort of arc of celebrity after On the Road came out.
Absolutely, exactly, right. He had become sort of so out of favor gradually throughout the 70s, and then remember in the fall of 90 we had the nightmare of Ronald Reagan getting elected, and sort of selfishness becoming the mantra of the country in a way.
Well, and air quotes, greatness, right?
What's that?
And greatness. It was sort of the era of American exceptionalism, sort of, except. It sort of ignored all of those wonderful aspects of America that Kerouac himself chronicled throughout his life and his canon.
Right, like apple pie and a cup of coffee, and apple pie and ice cream. Was his diner go-to.
Right.
So I go into this final bookstore, and there's this poster. I couldn't find a copy of the book anywhere, and I go into this, the sixth bookstore of the day, and there's this big poster, the On the Road Conference in Boulder, Colorado, with like Ferlinghetti, McClure, Burroughs, Corso, Ginsberg, Abby Hoffman, Timothy Leary, Gary Snyder, everybody, David Amram, and Ken Kesey.
Right.
And it's like, so I ended up hitchhiking to that, and became friends with all those guys, and it completely changed my life. And so that was, and then I never wrote about it forever until that's a whole other long story about how that started with a Facebook. Somebody posted a photograph of that summit, which was the largest summit, to this day that ever occurred with all those people.
The famous quote, more of them together in one place at one time than had ever been assembled previously.
Yes, that's right, John Clowin Holmes. So that was all. We had come from all over the country, from all periods of Kerouac's life, and more of us were together than had ever been in one place at one time before.
Right.
John Clowin Holmes. What was I saying? So there was a photograph of a bunch of them from there that somebody posted to a Facebook group, and I was like, and they were like, "Oh my God, look at all those people in one place at one time! Unbelievable!" And to me, it was just a picture of my summer vacation.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's like, well, what's so special? Yeah, that's what we did one year. And so they started asking me about it, and so I thought, oh, God, all right. So I started to write the story, and honest to God, Mike, I thought it was just going to be a Facebook comment.
No kidding.
A photograph.
Absolutely.
And I kept writing the thing, and it was like, this is bigger than a comment on Facebook.
Yeah.
And it just continued to grow into and then I found all these files I had on it and all these audio cassettes,
Right.
because people used to record the Grateful Dead shows, and the pranksters talked about recording
Oh, yeah.
their conversations, and Jack and Neil had little reel-to-reels that they would record their conversations on, and
yeah.
Jack transcribed some of it for Visions of Cody.
Throughout his
so when
life,
I went on
guess,
this
yeah.
trip, I had this mindset that you're supposed to record stuff. And, I'm 21 years old or something, and but I've got this little, kind of handheld cassette deck.
Nice.
And I was constantly having to go and buy 2 more cassettes, and then I'd use those up and go buy 2 more.
Oh, man.
But anyway, so I had all these audio cassettes of the thing, and then photographs and all of that, and that's what led to finally getting that whole adventure down, The Hitchhiker's Guide to Jack Kerouac, about this 82 summit.
Now, I got to ask you about that because, as you said, sort of the sort of general consciousness of Kerouac himself, of the beat movement, but also in that early '80s period, sort of the arc of the prankster revolution and the psychedelic wave and the Grateful Dead sort of had really sort of gone out of the mainstream sort of American culture at that point. It was completely subcultural. Now, did that sort of connection of all those people, was that something that was always evident to you, or is that something that at the conference in '82 sort of became more crystallized for you?
Well, it became more crystallized there. But the first time I read about Kerouac and saw his name in print was reading articles in Rolling Stone about the Grateful Dead.
Right.
And they'd mentioned this Neil Cassidy guy who was in this book called On the Road. And then reading Tom Wolfe's Electric Kool-Aid Acid Test. And again, there's this, and I kept seeing these references to this book. And, if it had been 1 or 2 times you saw some book reference, it probably wouldn't have meant anything. But by the 4th or 5th time you're reading someplace about some book called On the Road, which at least has somewhat of an alluring title.
Right.
Like, what is this book that keeps showing up all over the place?
Right.
That led to that. So there was this kind of interconnectivity about it. But then in 2014, it was the 50th anniversary of the Pranksters bus trip in '64 across
Absolutely.
the country, immortalized in Wolfe's Electric Kool-Aid Acid Test. And so I sort of felt, and just like, again, all of this stuff is happenstance, man. This is, such proof. Paul Simon has a song called Proof, and, proof that there is something. I don't know whether, God or whatever it is, but there is something out there that affects our lives that's bigger than us.
Oh,
that,
yeah.
That kept me going to those 6 bookstores until I finally went into the one that had the poster that told me about the conference that changed my life.
And I think the verb you used, the going, it's the thing that keeps you going. That it, right?
Yeah, the it, right. Jack riffs on that, too, by Neil. But so in 2014, that Kesey has a second bus that actually Ken had bought and fixed up and turned into another roving bus because the original 39 had kind of deteriorated and wasn't really roadworthy. So he got a second one, got that all going, and completely psychedelicized it and had, an updated version. And he kept the trip going that way. Then his son did it on the 50th anniversary of the trip, and they went to all of these festivals, and they did not go to Woodstock.
Right.
They weren't going to Yasgur's Farm or Woodstock, and I was like, well, that's pretty stupid. And whatever was going on that weekend of the Yasgur's Farm Woodstock reunion got canceled.
Oh, no kidding.
And it was the only schedule change on like a 3-month trip for those guys.
Wow.
And it was the weekend of the Yasgur's Farm Woodstock reunion event.
Mm-hmm.
And so suddenly it was the only time that they deviated from their, preset schedule about going festival to festival all summer long was that weekend. And suddenly they were going to Yasgur's Farm. And I was like, Kesey's bus at Yasgur's Farm.
Right.
I've got to be there.
Exactly.
And so I went, and then that led. There's been sort of a domino tumble ever since that, where a number of the original Merry Pranksters have sort of fallen in with this sort of new crew of younger people that are all completely in the same spirit
Right.
as the original gang was, and are absolutely continuing it and taking it further
And-
all over North America to this day. And so I fell in with them, and then the originals like George Walker and Anonymous and Ken Babbs and Mountain Girl, and that kind of led to these discussions about, because they would go on and on about Kerouac and On the Road.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was like, well, let me get these guys on record, because, so many of the, we can't ask Allen Ginsberg questions anymore, or Gregory Corso, or Jack, or Neil. Most of them are gone.
Right.
Even Carolyn, God bless her. But the pranksters, being 10 years or so younger, are still here.
Right.
So let me get these guys on the record while we still can. So I went and, interviewed them all. Wavy Gravy was one of them. So I got all of them on the record talking about how, Jack and Neil changed their lives and created, and sort of turned them into what they were, was because of, who Jack and Neil were.
Right. And so all of that activity sort of is what became the contents of the second part of the trilogy, the how the Beats begat the Pranksters, right?
Right. That led to that. And then George Walker, no, also Hardly Visible. But
Absolutely.
He was like a fantastic guy, and he contributed to that a lot. And he also would pave the way for me to get a lot of those interviews because now I was working with George, and what a great guy. And Walter, I quote in the new book, On the Road with Cassidy's, that just came out last week, on the same pub date as On the Road, September 5th.
Right.
I quote Walter Salas, the director of On the Road, who said when he was making a documentary about On the Road, I met the youngest 70 and 80-year-olds I've ever met in my life.
Right.
And they still had curiosity and integrity.
And it speaks to that we were talking about earlier, like that the
Right.
thing that keeps them going.
Yeah, and that's another thing that I don't know. I must say this someplace. I don't know where now. There's so many books, but that if you're given the gift of seeing it, of getting it, the cosmic joke, the prank of life, you can see the diamonds in the sidewalk. You can see the flashes of light. Not everybody can see that stuff, and if you're somebody who can, that's just not a gift you were given. You were given that in order to pass it on.
Right.
And it's your job, whether you're a musician, an actor, a painter, a storyteller, a writer, a poet, whatever it is you do, a radio host that conveys the energy to the world through that medium, whatever your medium is, whether you're a barista in a coffee shop, if you get the grand prank of life, if you've got the twinkle in the eye and you know the joke, it's your job to pass that on, to shine the light, to turn other people on to, hey, psst, it's down this way, come on this way. And so that's what I think Jack was doing, and that's what I'm doing, and I think that it's all of our job. And then it doesn't matter when I die, because I'm just going to have been one guy carrying the torch for the time that I was here, and then when I go, hopefully you've touched that torch off to all these younger people that were along the way that also kind of like, hey, I think there's something in this direction. And then you come by and you tap the end of their torch and a flame flies up on that, and then you keep going and light all of these other torches throughout life as you go. It's
a beautiful, sort of humbling and empowering experience to be able to sort of lead someone from the rear. You know what I mean? To see them going and to say, yeah, you got it, man. Keep going. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. We are talking to Brian Hassett, author extraordinaire, world traveler, and man who will be visiting us here in Lowell for Lowell Celebrates Kerouac. You mentioned the brand new book just came out, On the Road with Cassidy's and Further Visions. This one chronicling a sort of a next chapter in your experience and what you're putting down in this Beat trilogy, right?
Yeah. It's funny. Somebody else I noticed this too, that it was like I'm sort of doing what Jack did in terms of the Duluwaz legend.
Right.
That he didn't write all of the books of his life in the sequence that they happened. Like he didn't write Gerard and then write Sax and then write Maggie, when his childhood books and then write his adult books. No, he just wrote them whenever and kind of then at the end, you could sort of take them at the end of his life and then put them in the chronological order.
Right.
And this was a book I'd been talking about. Me and John Cassidy became friends in the 90s.
Right.
And we started tootling around together and going on road trips and having adventures and stuff. And we joked about, it's a Cassidy and an author going on the road having adventures.
And
somebody should write a book about this.
And just for,
it should be me.
Just for the audience, just to let folks know if they don't. John Cassidy, of course, the son of beat icon and legend Neil Cassidy, the Dean Moriarty inspiration from Kerouac's epic On the Road.
Yeah, well contextualized.
Okay.
I tend to jump ahead.
I got to try to do my radio host thing if I can here, Brian.
Yeah, squeeze it in where you can get it. So that's who. You're right. So John is the son of Neil, and the only son of Neil Cassidy and Carolyn Cassidy, and he's just a heck of a lot of fun, and he's a musician, and just a funny guy.
Yeah.
And we just sort of got each other's sense of humor. So anyway, back in the 90s, we would have these adventures, and it would be like, I got to write this stuff down. And we actually did some recording and some filming and stuff. There are some, recorded documentation of us. But so anyway, we joked about like writing an on the road, in the 90s.
Right.
And then all of a sudden we started talking again. I don't know, in the last year or two, and you should come out and do LCK. We should do a show because I started doing one last year with George Walker from the Merry Pranksters.
Absolutely phenomenal, and folks should get on YouTube to Brian Hassett videos and check out some of that stuff. Absolutely mind blowing. You guys took that show not just to Lowell but all over the country.
Yeah, we did a whole West Coast tour and a whole East Coast tour. And brought his dad, Neil Cassidy and Jack Kerouac to life using the text of On the Road, with George being the Neil character.
Right.
And so John and I started talking about doing it. I was like, oh, what a better thing to have, the guy's actual offspring bring his dad to life, and I'll cover the Jack parts.
Yeah.
So we started doing that, and then I was like, I should. In fact, I wrote it down. I keep track of this stuff now. It was March 29th. I wrote down the note for the first time. Write that John and Brian book. And literally 5 months later, I was reading the proof copy of it.
Nice.
So that's pretty great. So it's a bunch of John and Brian stories in Los Angeles and Northport, Long Island, and all over the Midwest, and the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and all sorts of stuff. So it's all in connection with Kerouac stuff. So you learn about Jack, about Kerouac stuff, and you meet all sorts of his, friends and acolytes, and Walter Salles, the filmmaker, and actors who are portraying him, and all sorts of things like that. And it's also an on-the-road adventure with a Cassidy. So
absolutely.
Rollicking fun.
No doubt. We are speaking with Brian Hassett. The brand new book, On the Road with Cassidy's and Further Adventures, is just out, and Brian with John Cassidy will be in Lowell at Lowell Celebrates Kerouac. You guys are doing the Kerouac and Cassidy on Saturday night at Olympia Zorba Music Hall on October 6th. You're also doing the Brian Hassett Road Show over at Zorba with Mr. David Amram on October 5th, as well as a whole bunch of other performances. Brian and crew will be all over Lowell for Lowell Celebrates Kerouac. And I was just listening to you sort of describe the genesis of the new book and your adventures with John and knowing that the second book and how that came about, and then the genesis of the first book. It really does sort of. It mirrors the experience of myself personally, not directly, but like you hear all these little things about Kerouac, and then you get curious because you're hearing them from all places, and then you start looking into it, and then you say, well, this is something that I'm into, and then you start making moves to get involved, and all of a sudden you start meeting all these people, and then these adventures start happening. I mean, it really is beautiful how you're chronicling that in the spirit, in the way Kerouac did with this constant writing. I mean, and it seems like that's something that's just a fire that's been lit in you.
Oh yeah, because also, well, thanks for all of that, and yeah, and you know, that's the thing, and I've got the time now. You see, I used to live in Manhattan, and the last 6 years I was working at MTV, and
Right.
you know, I was in the music business, and so it was just constant stuff, like every day, every night, and so you'd have all of these spectacular adventures, and never have the time to write about them because there was always another one the next day.
Right.
Well, now I'm sort of retired, living up by a lake here on Lake Ontario, and I have the time to write. And damn it, I'm taking that time. I'm not doing other stuff. This, you know, I was in writing this new book. I I always end up having to dig through old notebooks and stuff,
Right.
whatever. And I was digging through something from 2001 where some of the stories in this new book are set, and I found this note to myself that it's like, I need to get a house. You know, a cabin, I think it said, a cabin full of books and time to write.
Right.
And that was my life goal in 2001. And I've got it.
Right.
And I'm not going to screw this up.
And
This is what I've wanted all my life.
And
The ability to stay home, and I'm not in a city anymore. Toronto's a half hour away.
Right.
So I'm so glad I'm not living right downtown where there's just 5 minutes out your door. There's a million things to do.
it gives you
I'm in this little kind of Cape Cod fishing town on the side of a lake, and
Right.
it's quiet, and I can do nothing but write until I go off and have fun in places like Lowell and Woodstock.
until you're ready to make your ascent to any city that has a subterranean scene and some beat sympathetic characters, right?
Right, and then write about it.
Absolutely. And we are speaking with Brian Hassett. In addition to the brand new book, the On the Road with Cassidy's and Further Adventures, as well as the other critical pieces of the Beat trilogy, you also this year you were published in a volume when we're talking about this sort of like crumb trail that people find Kerouac through. Kerouac on Record, a literary soundtrack edited by Simon Warner and Jim Sampas. You have a phenomenal section in there entitled "The Grateful Dead, Jack Kerouac Manifested as Music," right?
Nice, yeah, thanks. That was tons of fun to write. And when I heard about that book was coming in the pike, I was like, I got to be the guy who covers the Dead in that book. There better not be any other bastard on this earth who gets that one. So and boom, got it, did it, and yeah, immortalized. Got every single member of the Grateful Dead has said at some point, and often in depth and quite passionately, his devotion to On the Road or Neal Cassady or Kerouac or all three. So I mean, it was Jack, the book, Neal, the Beats were really central in everything that the Dead were about. Freudian slips there saying the pranksters because it was the same thing. These guys, the Beats and Jack and Neal, were the foundation that the pranksters leapt up into space from, and same with the Dead.
And when you talk about the sort of the personification of that connection, the one name you always go back to is the central figure in the Grateful Dead, and an epic prankster, but also a guy who never considered himself a hippie, but the youngest Beat was Jerry Garcia.
Right. Yeah. That's right. I just came across a quote someplace else that he said, I considered myself a Beat more than a hippie.
Yeah.
And yet, and still, the Grateful, or not, it's called Dead and Company, that's touring right now with, these years still to this day with John Mayer on guitar,
right, yeah.
is selling out amphitheaters all summer long, and what would 90% or up plus of these people don't know who Kerouac and Cassidy and the Beats are.
Right.
And so that's sort of also part of my mission. Is like I'm trying to turn those people onto the Beats, because that's how this stuff got here. That's how come how these guys formed. This was all of them, like independent of each other. They had all discovered either Cassidy or Kerouac or Ginsberg or something, and it was a part of their palette by the time they met, and then they blended it into their own portrait of it, but it was foundational for all of them. And so I'm trying to turn the Deadheads on to, hey, dig this beat thing. This was where the Dead comes from, And then the beat people, the Jack people, are not necessarily aware of this really important cultural bridge that he spawned that's still going to this day. As I say, the Grateful Dead were the world's greatest travel agency.
Right.
I mean, Jack might have written On the Road, but like the Dead got more people to go on the road than did any other entity in history.
Right.
So there's this very direct connection. And one of the most performed songs is the other one with the line, there's Cowboy Neil at the wheel of the bus to Never Ever Land.
Right.
The bus came by and I got on. That's when it all began. So, they're singing that from the stage. It's this really clear arc, and a lot of the Jack and Beat people aren't really aware that he is still alive, all summer long at all of these events. His spirit is still surging through the country.
Absolutely.
And so my job is like to turn the Beats and the Jacksters onto the pranksters and the prankster people onto the Jack people.
Yeah. Absolutely. To sort of align those stars of that continuum of American bohemianism that just this sort of is woven through all of it. Absolutely.
Right. They're already aligned. It's just a matter to point people out. I just provide the telescope. Look, there they are. You can see they're all in a line.
Absolutely. It is Brian Hassett on the line. We are on Almost Acoustic here on 91.5 WUML Lowell, talking all kinds of stuff. Brian, of course, will be in Lowell at Lowell Celebrates Kerouac, doing several appearances, two of which on October 5th and October 6th, Friday and Saturday night at Olympia Zorba Music Hall, paired up with some fantastic musicians, with David Amram and his jazz band on Friday, and with, of course, the one and only Vance Gilbert on Saturday night. Saturday night, of course, also going to feature John Cassidy in town with you and a whole bunch of other fantastic stuff. Brian, it is always a pleasure to talk to you. I cannot wait to hang out with you in Lowell in just a couple weeks, and I know that there will be all kinds of surprises to be had, all kinds of adventures, and hopefully, you never know, if you hang out with Brian, you might end up in a book somewhere.
That's true. Be careful when you hang out with writers. You can end up in a book, and it happens.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Brian, it is so great to talk to you. I'm going to get on rolling down the road here, but, we've been talking so much about the Dead, etc. I figured I would go out with one that sort of crystallizes that. This is further from when they came to Lowell, Asher Park in June 30th, 2010, doing so many roads. And
great choice.
Absolutely. All roads lead to Lowell on the first weekend of October. Brian, I cannot wait to see you here at Lowell Celebrates Kerouac. If people want to keep up to date with you and everything going on with you, what's the best way for them to stay
really,
in
BrianHassett.com. 2 S's, 2 T's. BrianHassett.com. Everything's there. You can find it all.
Absolutely. Brian, I'll see you in Lowell in a couple weeks, and we'll see you on down the road, buddy.
Great, Mike. Look forward to it.
Almost Acoustic on 91.5 FM WUML Lowell. We are your friends on the low end.